Last week we saw as Jesus left his disciples and went back to heaven. Before leaving, he had told them that they would go out into the world. But how could these men, who had only really known Israel, go out into the world? How could such a small group of people make a difference? Jesus had told them that it was better that he should go because a helper would come. Who was this helper? Well, the helper was another name for the Holy Spirit. Jesus was both God and man, so could only physically be in one place at one time. But the Holy Spirit was the same God come to help his people, but could be in many places at the same time. Jesus knew he needed to leave so the helper could be with each of his followers at the same time, just as if he was standing right next to them, even if they were scattered all over the world. Well, 10 days after Jesus left, something amazing happened. It was a special day called Pentecost. The disciples were all together, and suddenly a sound like the blowing of a violent wind came, and what seemed to be like little flames rested on each of their heads, and they were all filled with the Holy Spirit. They started speaking in lots of different languages that they'd never spoken before. During Pentecost, people came to Jerusalem from all over the world. They all spoke different languages, but because of the Holy Spirit, they were all able to understand exactly what was being said. The people were amazed. Peter then stood up and preached a sermon like no one had ever heard before, and 3,000 people believed and were baptized. The Holy Spirit was sent to remind the world of what Jesus taught and what he did. He acted like a spotlight who draws attention to what Jesus has done, what he is doing, and who he is. This moment with wind, fire and languages was a very special occasion which showed that this was the beginning of a new part in the history of God's people. The leaders of Israel who had killed Jesus weeks before were now wanting to kill these new followers, so the disciples spread and went out into the rest of the world. The Bible tells us about how the disciples went from Israel to Samaria, to Turkey, Greece, Malta and Italy. And other history books tell us about the first 100 years of the Christian faith as it went to Spain and Egypt and India and Sri Lanka and Algeria and other parts of North Africa. Within another 50 years, there were Christians in Portugal and Morocco, and soon it spread to France and Austria and Switzerland and Belgium, and within 300 years, there were Christians here in Britain. The good news about Jesus wasn't just for one group of people. No, it is for the whole world. And that's why we find Christians in every continent. Heaven will be full of people from all nations worshipping Jesus. And remember that the Holy Spirit wasn't just for the first disciples. He's in every single person who follows Jesus. He doesn't normally come in flames and wind, but he lives inside you as the helper Jesus promised to send. The Holy Spirit has many jobs. He shows us who Jesus is. He makes us more like Jesus by showing us what sin is and what is good for us to do instead. He helps us in difficult situations and gives us the right words to say.